Thousands of tired, nerve-shaken, over-civilized people are beginning to find out that going to the mountains is going home, that wildness is a necessity, and that mountain parks and reservations are useful not only as fountains of timber and irrigating rivers, but as fountains of life. John Muir.
On June 30th, 1864, less than 1 month after the Confederate victory at Cold Harbor, a bill passed the 38th United States Congress and was signed by Abraham Lincoln the same day. While America was fighting the most bloody conflict in its history, over 700,000 acres of high mountains and cascading waters in California were now protected by law. Though it may have seemed like strange legislation given that the fate of the very nation was uncertain, Americans had been enacting federal protections of natural wonders as early as 1832, designating Hot Springs Reservation in Arkansas. The growing interest in protecting America's great outdoors would later set a precedent for the formation of America's national parks from the Everglades to Alaska. In the late 19th century, another movement began across the nation, the creation of state park systems. There was a desire to preserve natural places that would allow individuals and families to recreate close to home. There are a variety of parks that could fall under the title of First State Park, but generally it is accorded to Niagara Falls State Park in New York, established in 1885. The development of metropolitan parks such as New York's Central Park also came into play as the century neared its completion. By the end of the 1800s, several national parks had been established, from Washington to the Rocky Mountains. By the early 20th century, people in Wyoming decided that a national park spanning over 2 million square acres and spilling over into 3 states was not enough. The Cowboy State's reservoirs and lesser-known geothermal hotspots began to draw locals and visitors alike, who came to drink from nature's fountains of life where the nerve-shaken and over-civilized could breathe free. Out west, people had been flocking to a strange site in north-central Wyoming. Like Yellowstone, it was a natural wonder of boiling springs and beautiful terraces. People came from across the country to soak in the mineral pools here in hopes of finding relief from everything from asthma to rheumatism. After being treated, many guests would climb the red hill behind the springs and etch their names into the rocks, or build stone monuments to the good health they'd now enjoyed. Shoshone Chief Washakie was known to enjoy the site as well and had a bathhouse built there. In 1896, Chief Washakie and Arapaho Chief Sharpnose were compelled to sell the hot springs to the federal government under the condition that the springs would remain free and available for all people to use. The land was given to the state of Wyoming, forming the Cowboy State's first state park. Today, the Wyoming bathhouse remains free and open to all visitors who want to soak in the hot mineral pools fed by the spring. We hike with local resident and historian Barb Vietti to the top of Monument Hill, where visitors continue to write about their experiences at this site.
I came here with friends in the March of 2008 with some very special and amazing experiences. I later ended up marrying one of the guys I came with. I will always hold Thermont close to my heart and remember floating in the hot pools, going to the Wax Museum, and falling in love. Oh, please pray for all of us and all marriages.
As the young century progressed, 1916 became an important milestone for national parks across the country. Although they had existed prior to this date, there was no cohesive form of management for these iconic properties. So on August 25, 1916, President Woodrow Wilson signed into law an act creating the National Park Service, and Stephen Mather was named the new agency's first director. The early 1900s also saw an important development for state parks across the U.S. as well. In January 1921, 200 people from across the country attended the first 3-day national conference on parks in Iowa. It was a solution to the concern of too many national parks. Stephen Mather wanted states to acquire many of the would-be national parks as state parks and leave the federal government free to consider only those with true national significance for the national park system. It's been argued that the proliferation of the automobile in the early 1900s did more to get Americans interested in camping and going outdoors than any other technological innovation. By the 1920s, national park visitation exceeded more than 1 million visitors per year. The Black and Yellow Highway, which ran from the Black Hills of South Dakota to Yellowstone, became a common route across Wyoming to see Old Faithful and Yellowstone Falls. In southeastern Wyoming, Elwood Meade and Charles A. Guernsey saw their lobbying for the Guernsey Dam come to fruition in 1927, and locals began to visit the newly formed lake. However, soon after the dam was built, Wyomingites, along with the rest of the country, began to struggle in the Great Depression of the 1930s. To help improve life during the Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, was formed by Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. Men in their 20s and late teens could enroll as laborers for the period of 6 months at a time for up to 2 years in total. While building roads and other public projects, they received $30 a month, with $25 of it being sent home to their families. In Yellowstone National Park, enrollees of the CCC built trails and lodging as well as fire prevention methods. Their efforts are credited as having helped restore the world's first national park in time of economic crisis. At Guernsey Reservoir, men of the Civilian Conservation Corps were transforming the pine-covered high cliffs and steep slopes into navigable roads, complete with drainage and picnic shelters for the weary travelers. Today, the site is still dotted with CCC structures from stairs to bridges and even a museum. Architects such as Conrad Worth and Thomas Vint pioneered a rustic architectural style at Guernsey that became a chosen aesthetic for facilities in natural settings throughout the country. Sometimes called parkitecture, the visual styles pioneered at Guernsey State Park involved the use of natural materials found in the area to help the man-made structures be less obtrusive in their natural surroundings. In many cases, they appear to grow out of the ground they were built on in an effort to harmonize with the surrounding landscape they inhabit. Many efforts were made to eliminate the straight lines common in architecture, but not found in nature, giving visitors a more natural experience while enjoying the convenience of picnic shelters and water fountains. The pride and effort put into these structures is evident in that they are still in use today over 80 years later. Although this style of building has become commonplace in American parks, a healthy spirit of competition between the two CCC camps established at Guernsey soon led to the development of buildings that were anything but common. Near the North Bluff overlooking Guernsey Reservoir, a simple outhouse was transformed by the CCC into the $1 million Biffy. Nearby, the labor-hungry CCC transformer was supposed to be a simple picnic structure into the castle, a behemoth of locally quarried stone that perches high on the cliffs above the reservoir. The castle is a 2-story monster featuring a fireplace, room for visitors, and an observation deck. The courses of uneven stones have been hewn into near-Gothic arches and unusual windows that give it the feel of a cathedral overlooking the lake. Its double arches are centered on the distant Laramie Peak, which was the first glimpse of the Rocky Mountains immigrants on the nearby Oregon Trail saw when heading west onto the frontier. As the 1930s dwindled, the Wyoming State Parks Commission was formed. Another component of preserving and sharing Wyoming's open spaces with residents and visitors alike involved the creation of the Wyoming Historical Landmark Commission in 1927. The commission was charged with protecting and interpreting the extensive network of historic sites across the state. From Independence Rock, where pioneers carved their names along the Oregon Trail, to Fort Phil Kearny, made famous by the 1866 Fetterman fight between Red Cloud and Captain William J. Fetterman. The formation of the commission led to the designating of Wyoming's first state historic site in 1929. Fort Bridger was originally formed in 1842 as a trading post by trapper, guide, and legend Jim Bridger on the banks of the Black Forks River. After the Civil War, federal troops began to build up the site with officers' quarters, commissaries, and barracks. The evolving character of the site continued well into the 1900s. As America's first transcontinental motor route, the Lincoln Highway ran past the site of old Fort Bridger. During the early 1900s, visitors had made the historic site a popular place to stop and stretch their legs. The black and orange cabins remain at Fort Bridger, serving as a window into a different era when early travelers could park their cars in camp garages and have a cabin all to themselves for around $1 a night.
In North Africa, American tank and anti-tank units crashing with Nazi armor.
The war years of the early 1940s saw many changes across America, from rationing of gas and goods to the dearth of labor, as much of the country's young labor force headed overseas to fight in Europe and the Pacific. The lack of forestry workers and potential firefighters led to the creation of one of the U.S. Forest Service most notable icons, Smokey Bear. In Wyoming, the effort to combat the threat of forest fires was aided in an unusual way. This lone building, which recently has become part of a state historic site, is all the remains of a 687-acre POW camp, once situated across the North Platte River from the farming and ranching town of Douglas, Wyoming. Many of the Italian and German POWs housed at the site from 1943 to 1946 volunteered to cut lumber in various locations across the state to escape the boredom of their daily routines. Under armed guard, these prisoners in a strange land earned as much as $4 a day to thin the growing forests across the Rocky Mountains. One Douglas resident noted that 6 military guards were sent with one timber crew, but they seldom went into the timber with the prisoners. The men seemed to appreciate the privilege of spending time in the mountains and made no attempt to escape. The 1950s and 1960s saw the face of recreation change in America. 1958 witnessed the development of the Outdoor Recreation Resource Review Commission. In 1962, this commission produced a report that led to the establishment of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. The Land and Water Conservation Fund State Assistance Program assisted in improving facilities in state and local parks across the country.
The Land and Water Conservation Fund was started in 1964 in an effort to preserve America's open spaces. And that being said, it was to keep development from taking over all available recreational open space and to provide for outdoor recreation. But what it really gives you is it gives you across the board access to all socioeconomic classes to come out and recreate.
Wyoming in the 60s saw snowmobile clubs starting their own off-road trails program to enjoy nature even during the state's most frosty months. By 1984, the state legislature established the State Trails Program and snowmobile registration fees, which made for better grooming, maintenance, and safety of these trails. By 1987, the program was merged with the Wyoming Recreation Commission. Future legislation in the early 2000s would establish ORV registration, and the ORV program was born.
I'm Woodsy Owl, and I'm here to tell you about a dirty word, pollution.
As the century moved forward, parks across the country enjoyed improvements from visitor centers to exhibits and audio-visual programs. In Wyoming, reservoirs that had been built as early as the turn of the century, like the Buffalo Bill Cody Dam near Yellowstone, were converted into state parks, allowing for more recreational opportunities as visitors from all over came to see the West. By 1972, Granite Reservoir in southeast Wyoming became a state park named for one of the state's native sons. Kurt Gowdy was an outdoorsman who took his love of sports to television in the 1960s and 70s. Though the dam at the site was built in the early 1900s, a new construction project began in the early 2000s to invite people to experience the site in a whole new way. Another late development of the 20th century in the cowboy state was the combination of the Wyoming Recreation Commission, Wyoming State Archive, State Museums and Historical Department within the Wyoming Department of Commerce in 1990. In 2010, the National Association of State Park Directors officially branded the 50 state parks as America's State Parks, and by 2012 established First Day Hikes as a signature event where all 50 state park systems host January 1st hikes, getting people out in the parks to start the year off right. As we move further into the new millennium, we continue to seek new ways to enjoy the outdoors as we strive to invite more people from more and more diverse walks of life to experience their state parks. From simple amenities like showers and RV hookups to unique camping structures like yurts and tree houses, we will continue to provide Wyomingites and our visitors the best experiences we can offer. We will continue to push the envelope by exploring new activities like fat biking, adventure racing, and zip lines, all while staying true to our core mission, making people smile.